Well, we've been talking about sins that hold us hostage. And the reason I've been teaching on this, and this is the last one today, but I'm not doing this to try to make you feel guilty. I'm not doing this to try to make your life hard. Actually, I'm doing it so that you can have joy in your life. And these things that I'm talking about, we talked about bitterness, and we talked about fear, we talked about anger, we talked about addictions in our life. All these things keep us from joy. And the sin that I'm going to talk about today, it also keeps you from joy. As a matter of fact, the sin I'm going to talk about today is the sin, I read this somewhere, the sin that nobody enjoys. You know, there's some sin that has pleasure for a season. And then it brings grief and heartache and sorrow. But this sin brings nobody pleasure at any time. But it is a very, very common sin. It's part of our basis, our nature, and I must admit that I have had to deal with this sin in my own life. It has cropped up in my own life. And what am I talking about today? I'm talking about envy and jealousy. And it is in our flesh. It is there. And it'll rise up if we don't take it to the cross. And many of these sins that I'm talking about, the cure or the way you deal with them are the same. One, you have to recognize it, and then you have to repent of it. And basically, those are the two main things that you deal with: anger, and that you deal with bitterness. And of course, bitterness and anger sometimes involves forgiveness. But today I want to talk to you about envy. And I'm not going to give you a lot of points today. You know, my old pastor used to say that us preachers make mistakes by trying to give too much stuff. Sometimes we give 4 or 5 points and 3 or 4 sub-points. And he used to say, if your people can leave with one truth, one great truth, if they can leave and remember that. You know, most people will forget the sermon by Wednesday night. As a preacher, if I want to be humbled, I can just ask somebody on Thursday, what did I preach on Sunday? I don't ask because I don't want to be humbled. But most people cannot remember, much less all the points. But if we can get one truth. And so today we're going to talk about this one truth about envy. James chapter 3, verse 16, for where envy and strife is. By the way, envy and strife are brothers. They go along together. Usually when you'll find strife, you'll find pride, or you'll find envy and jealousy. And by the way, when we say envy, we could use the word jealousy. They're both the same. But it's amazing how we let envy and jealousy come into our life that causes strife. There is confusion and every evil work. I tell you, when you see something evil going on, you can pretty much see that the root of the evil is envy and jealousy. There was a little girl who was very, very happy. She had her tooth come out, and she put her tooth under the pillow, and the tooth fairy came and gave her $2. And man, she was excited. She was so happy. $2 is a lot of money for a little girl in the 2nd grade. And she went and spent the night with her friend. And she was telling her friend, the tooth fairy came. Y'all know who the tooth fairy is, right? The tooth fairy came and gave me $2 under my pillow. And her friend said, oh, really? Well, I put my tooth under my pillow, and I got $10. And the little girl who got $2 wasn't near as happy as she was. Her happiness was gone. And the next morning, she saw this little girl's mother, who she had spent the night with. And she said to her mother, she said, could you call my mama and tell her where you get your tooth fairy from? Because I'd like to get the $10 instead of the $2. But isn't it funny how we can be happy with what God has given us? We can be happy with what we have until we see somebody that has more and we want more. You can see it in the NFL. You know, these football players. Here's one football player who made like $14 million. He signed a contract for $14 million. You know what? That could make a person happy. You could call home and tell mama about that, couldn't you? But he's had a couple of good seasons, and he knows some other players at his position that make a lot more, and so he is unhappy, and he is refusing to play till he gets more money. Isn't that how we are? Isn't that the base nature of man? We don't want anybody else to be happier than we are. We don't want anybody else to have more than we do. And let me tell you, that envy in our flesh is the root of all kinds of evil. I read of a young man named Leo Wilson Jr. He was 16 years old. He had saved his money so that he could buy him some Nike sneakers. As a matter of fact, it says here these sneakers cost, I read this, $125. Is that true? Do people pay $125 for sneakers? Wow. You'd never see me doing that. I go to Walmart and pay about $10 for sneakers. You say, why is that? Because I'm cheap. That's why. But, boy, that's amazing to me that kids would do that. But this is a sad story. One Saturday night in Houston, Texas, someone took a 9mm pistol and stole this boy's shoes and said if he didn't get his shoes, he'd shoot him, and shot the kid anyway. Stole his shoes, shot the kid. He did survive. He didn't die, but he was handicapped for the rest of his life. Why? Because somebody envied his shoes. It's amazing the evil that comes from this sin of envy and jealousy and wanting something that is not yours. Coveting. You know, coveting is a root of all kinds of evil and sin and wickedness. You know, the first murder in the Bible was because of envy. Cain slew his brother Abel. By the way, the first murder came in the first family. Envy will ruin families. Families have been destroyed because of envy. I was telling Tommy this before church. I was saying here we have the first worship wars. You've heard of the worship wars where people are fussing and fighting. I know of a church that split in the last few weeks. And one of the reasons, not the main reason, but one of the reasons is because they disagreed about how to worship. Some people say, I like the old songs. I like the new songs. I like this song. I like that song. But you know, people get envious and jealous because they want their music sung in church. They got, wouldn't it be great? Okay, maybe this isn't your favorite song, but maybe it's somebody else's. You know, I believe we can get along. And one of the things that's causing so much strife, and let me tell you something, envy and strife is filled in our churches. It's full of people, full of strife, and it's causing all kinds of problems. And I'll tell you one more. I know this because I am one. Envy and strife and jealousy is a big part of preachers. Preachers are jealous of one another, jealous of their churches. And some guys got a big church and some guys got a better church, and guys get envious and jealous, and strife comes. Even within a church, and people in the church get jealous over music maybe. Somebody sang a special and I wanted to sing and they didn't ask me to sing. And there's so many ways that the devil gets in and causes that old base, sinful flesh to rise up and cause problems. It was the first murder. You remember Moses? God was using Moses to lead his people out of Egypt and into the promised land, and yet the old devil worked and tried to stop him. And one of the ways he did it was with envy. And by the way, envy is often present when someone is envious of someone else's authority. And what happened? Moses was leading the people, and the truth is Moses was a reluctant leader. He didn't really want to do it. He tried to get out of it. And Korah, one of the men there, and some others got together and they had confronted Moses and they said, You take too much authority upon yourself. You're not the only one God talks to. God could speak to us and God could lead us. And I tell you what, it made God mad. Yeah, God could have chose them, but he didn't. He chose Moses. You got to have somebody who's a leader. And thank God for followers. In my life, there are times when I lead and there's times when I follow. And I want to be good at both. But there's some people that have trouble with any kind of authority. And they get jealous and envious. And some people think, man, I wish I could be the leader. Let me tell you something, it's not so great being the leader. Most leaders I know wish they weren't the leader. The leader, you have responsibilities and things that aren't so pleasant. And we have to obey God and do what God wants us to do. But isn't it funny how that people, I wish I was a leader. And then the leaders are like, I wish I was a follower. I know a preacher who told me one time, he said, I have prayed and prayed to God that he would not let me lead. I told God if I could just be a layman, I'd be the best layman he ever had. I'd be a good layman. I'd support my pastor. I would be good. If God, you just let me be a layman and not be a preacher. And he said, God won't do it. God won't do it. And so, authority. You remember David? Man after God's own heart. But David was almost destroyed by Saul. You remember Saul, who got jealous and envious? You see, they were singing, Saul has slain his thousands. But what were they saying about David? David has slain his 10,000s. By the way, that's not so easy to hear. You know, we can all get mad at Saul, but let me tell you something. We're all built that way. That we need to recognize that it is possible in our wicked heart, and our hearts are wicked. If you're here today and you think you're good, you're deceived. There's none good, no, not one. It's in the Bible. Well, I'm a good person. No, you're not. You just haven't looked in the mirror close enough. I could prove it to you, but I don't have time. We could show you a lot of things you've done wrong. Galatians 5:21 tells us that envy is one of the acts of the sinful nature. Romans 1:29 says they have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. Malice means wanting to hurt somebody. And that's what happens when you get jealous and you get envious. You want to hurt somebody. Maybe you don't want to hurt them physically, but you'd like to hurt them with your words. You'd like to hurt them verbally. That's why we can make some little cutting remarks. You ever done that? Boy, I have. You know, just say a little word that kind of jabs somebody. You know how it works. Mr. Webster says this in his dictionary. Envy, a feeling of antagonism towards someone because of some good which he is enjoying, but which one does not have oneself. A coveting of oneself of the good which someone else is enjoying. We just can't stand for somebody to enjoy themselves, can we? We can't stand for somebody to be happy. And we can't stand for somebody to have more than we have. We want what they've got, and if we can't get it, what happens? Envy and jealousy. And all kinds of evil comes from that. In other words, envy is saying, I like what you've got, and I don't like the fact that you have it and I don't. The heart of envy is a belief. Now listen to this. The heart of envy is a belief that we deserve better than we've got. Now let me tell you something. One of the keys to happiness in your life is when you realize you deserve nothing good. The truth is, if we got what we deserve, we'd all go to hell. Because we're sinners against God. Anything we have is by the grace of God. If you think, well, I deserve good things to happen to me. I deserve a nice home, and I deserve a nice car, and I deserve good things to happen to me, you will not be happy because you'll never get everything you think you deserve. But you know what? No matter what happens to me today, it's better than me being in hell, isn't it? And that's where I deserve to be. Because of my sin. I don't deserve to be a child of God. I don't deserve to be forgiven. I don't deserve to have a conscience that is clear because of the blood of Jesus. Thank God I don't get what I deserve. But God shows me grace. The truth is, we deserve hell. And so we can be thankful no matter what condition we're in. That's why I said you can be happy no matter what state you're in. Paul said he had learned that. And sometimes contentment is something you got to learn. You think, Brother Carl, are you happy because you got a nice home? Let me tell you something. I was happy in that little duplex. As a matter of fact, now I got too much to take care of. I wish I had a smaller home, really. We got 2 air conditioners. Isn't that great? I got to pay twice as much to get them fixed. You know, we think having a lot makes us happy. Let me tell you something. If you can't be happy in a little shack with a dirt floor, happiness doesn't come by what you have on the outside. Happiness comes by your attitude on the inside. And you can rejoice in whatever state you're in. And that is the key to dealing with envy. When you can be happy with what God has given you. And you know, all we have to do is please our Father. I don't have to please anybody else. My daughter told me the other day, she said, Daddy, you're wearing your socks way too high. She said, people don't wear their socks that high nowadays. They scoot them down. And I said, I like wearing them high. But Daddy, everybody else wears them low. Why should I wear my socks like everybody else likes them? Why shouldn't I wear them like I like them? I'm not trying to please everybody else. See, when you get old, you don't worry about that stuff. See, really, I don't have to please my preacher friends. I don't have to please you. I've got to please my Father in heaven. Boy, if I can do that, why should I worry about anybody else? If He can smile with approval on my life, if He can say, you've done a good job. Sadly, I'd have to tell you, I haven't always pleased Him. But my heart is, I want to, and I'm trying to please my Lord. But Jesus tells a story. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase it so you'll understand it, but I think you'll get the point of the story. Jesus said a man went out and he had some fields that needed harvesting. And so he went out early in the morning. About 6 o'clock in the morning, he found some guys and says, hey, you guys got something to do today? And they said, no. He said, would you like to help me? And he said, sure. And he says, I tell you what, you go and work my farm and collect the fruit, and I'll give you $50. They said, okay, that's fair. So they go to work. Well, he's looking out there and he sees them working, and then he sees some other guys kind of hanging around. He goes to them. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. He says, you guys got something to do? And they said, no. He said, would you like to work for me and harvest my farm? And they said, sure. So those guys go to work at 9 o'clock. Well, he goes out about 12 o'clock noon. He sees some other guys out there not working. He said, you guys want a job? And they said, yeah, sure. So they go to work at 12 o'clock. And then he goes out at 3 o'clock. He sees some more guys out there working or not working and says, would you like to help me? And so he's hired all these guys at different times. And so it comes time to get paid. The day's done. They've done their work. They all did a good job. He tells his foreman, pay the guys. And so the guys that got there last got paid first, and they got $50. And then the guys that came at noon, they got $50. And the guys there at 9 o'clock, they got $50. And the guys that came in the morning at 6 o'clock, they got $50. But the guys who got there at 6 o'clock, they started griping and they said, look, we worked all day. This isn't fair. We deserve more. And the owner said, didn't we agree that you would work for $50? Yeah, but look, you paid these guys that only worked 3 or 4 hours. You paid them $50. And he says, why does it matter that I'm generous and I gave them $50 when I kept my word to you and I gave you what I promised you? Now, these guys weren't union guys, of course. But that's the way we think, isn't it? That's the way we think. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. I mean, if he wanted to give a guy that worked an hour $50, as long as he kept his word and gave you $50, what does it matter to you? But see, we compare. Here's one of the problems with envy, okay? Listen to me. We start comparing ourselves to others. And I tell you what we need to compare ourselves to. Compare your life without the blessing of God and compare it now. That's what we need to compare it to. Look what God has given us. Look what God has done for us. And God has done some wonderful things for us. So, do you tend to be envious? Well, let's take a test, okay? Are you content with what you have? 1 Timothy 6:6 says this, godliness and contentment is great gain. Isn't that good? If you're content, then you've got all you need. How can you be richer than that? For we brought nothing into the world, that's for sure, and we can take nothing out of it. You can't take a thing with you. You don't see a U-Haul following a hearse, do you? You can't take it with you. That's why I use it for the glory of God now. Set up for yourself treasure in heaven. Because your treasure down here, you're just going to leave it for somebody else. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Boy, Paul said, if you have something to eat, you have something to drink, be content. Be content with that. But we're not, are we? We've got to have the newest gadget. We've got to have a bigger home. We've got to have more stuff. And it doesn't make you happier. The Bible tells us in the book of Judges, one of my favorite stories, I used to tell this to the kids a lot. The trees got together. This is in Judges chapter 9, if you want to read it, verse 8. All the trees got together and they said, we are going to anoint a king. And this is a little parable in the Old Testament that teaches us about contentment. And so the trees got together and they said, olive tree, would you be the king over us? Would you rule over us? And he said, oh no, I couldn't do that. For I would have to give up the fatness of the oil of the olives that God uses to anoint kings. Oh no, I could never do that. And so they go to the fig tree and they say, fig tree, rule over us. And the fig tree says, oh, I can't do that. And give up my job of providing the sweetness. I am the sweetest of all the trees. I enlighten the eyes of men with my sweetness. And then they go to the vine and they say, vine, would you rule over us? And the vine says, I'm sorry, I can't. For the fruit and the wine that comes from my fruit cheers both God and man. Why should I do that? And so the trees were like, well, who can we get? And they go to a little bramble bush. And they say, bramble bush, will you be the king over us? And the bramble bush says, oh no, I couldn't be king. For even though I'm small and I don't give much shade, but do you know a fire started with me will bring down the cedars of Lebanon? Why should I lower myself to be the king? And the whole moral of that story is that these trees didn't have to be somebody else. And by the way, I hope you don't want to swap your life with anybody else. You look at somebody else and say, oh, I wish I was him. No, you don't. First of all, you don't know what's in that guy's heart. Just be content with who God made you to be and who you are. God knows best, and God made us the way we are. And it may be your lot to do something different or maybe not appear successful in the eyes of men. None of that matters. Rejoice in who you are. Thank God for who you are. Are you content? If I were to ask you, are you content with your job? Are you content with your home? Are you content with your house? Are you content with your family? Now, if you say, well, I'm content, but I'd like to have a little more. Yeah, I like my house, but I need to do more to it. I like my job, but then you're not really content until you can be happy with what you have. The truth is, listen to me now, we are so rich. You remember the rich young ruler that went to Jesus? He was wealthy. He made a bad choice. He chose his riches. Jesus said, sell what you have and give it to the poor, and he couldn't do it. But do you know that the rich young ruler could not ride in a car? And I can. The rich young ruler could not have eye surgery. I've had eye surgery. Didn't do much good, but I had it. Do you know the rich young ruler couldn't flip a switch and lights come on? He couldn't buy penicillin. He couldn't hear a pipe organ. He couldn't watch TV. He couldn't turn on a faucet and water come out. He couldn't type a letter. He couldn't mow the lawn. He couldn't fly in an airplane. He couldn't sleep on a new mattress that you could put a drink on and jump up and down. The drink doesn't even fall. I saw it on TV. Wow, what a night's sleep. The rich young ruler, Solomon, didn't have that. Let me tell you something. We live in a day where we have more conveniences than the richest king did hundreds of years ago. Most of us eat like a king. I do. I eat good. Can y'all tell? We do. We've got a wonderful life. Isn't it sad that we can be unhappy because we compare it with somebody else who's got more? A teenage girl wrote a letter to Dear Abby. Y'all know who Dear Abby is. Some of you old folks do. She was a columnist who gave advice. This little girl wrote a letter, teenage girl. I think she was 15. And she wrote a letter and she said, happiness is having a mom and dad that do this for you. Happiness is having your own phone. Happiness is doing all this. And then at the end she said, that's why I am unhappy. Signed, unhappy teenager. About a week or two later, Dear Abby got another letter from a 16-year-old. She said, happiness is being able to see. Happiness is being able to walk. Happiness is being able to get out of bed. And she said, I can walk and I can get she said, I can see, I can get out of bed, but I cannot walk. Signed, happy 16-year-old. You see, it all depends on your perspective. It depends on your own heart. The other day I took Lacey's car to get new tires and get the front, get it aligned and all. I thought it would take me an hour. I went at 9:30. I took my computer with me. I'm glad I did. Well, it was almost 12 before they even took the car in the shop. And then they were having trouble. They couldn't get it aligned. They test drive it and they'd say it's still pulling. And I was there till 4:30 in the afternoon. And it was a little afternoon when I decided that this was going to be a test of my character. And I said, can these people make me unhappy? And I determined they were not going to. And I smiled and I was happy. A lady came in to refill the machine, the vending machine. I talked with her. We were laughing and joking. We felt like we knew each other. There was a man there who used to write for the Tennessean. And I got to know that guy. When he left, he said, man, I've enjoyed talking with you. He left several hours before I did. The guy in charge of the place came to me. He said, Carl, I am so sorry it's taken this long. He said, let me explain to you what happened. And I said, wait a minute. I just want you to know this better be good. And we laughed and cut up. He finally got it fixed. But you know what? I could have, and when I was younger, this would have definitely happened. I could have been hot and mad and angry. And it would have messed up my whole day, maybe 2 or 3 days. I mean, my lunch was a bag of chips and a Diet Coke out of my machine. That's not good for a diabetic, even though I did enjoy the chips, I must admit. But that was a challenge to me. And you know what? Happiness is a choice. You can either get up and say, I'm going to be gripey and fussy and I'm mad at the world and I'm going to throw a pity party. Or you can make a choice. You know what? I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be happy. It's your choice in your spirit. Let me share this story and I'll be through. Told a lot of stories today, but I wanted to illustrate about envy. There were two men who were in the hospital. They were older men. They were very badly sick. They shared a hospital room. One of them was over in the corner by the wall. The other one was on the other side. And there was a window on the other side. The man closest to the window had a disease where his lungs were filling with fluid. And so he had to lay down some and then they would prop him up. They would prop him up for about an hour a day. The other man was pretty much flat on his back and couldn't move. The man close to the window, they would prop him up once a day. And they began to talk and they became friends. They talked about their families. They talked about vacations they'd been on. They talked about their jobs. They talked about different things. They became friends. But when they would prop that man up and he would say, let me tell you what I see out the window. He said, there's a park right outside and there's a little pond and in the background you can see the skyline of the city. And one day they propped him up and he said, there's a parade going by. And every day when they prop him up, he would tell the man what was going on outside. He said, let me tell you this. I know you can't see it, but let me show you. Let me tell you what's going on so maybe you'll know what's going on. And the man got to where he really enjoyed that time where they were talking. And then one day he had an evil thought that caused him much shame. He thought, why shouldn't I be able to be by the window? Why does he get to see all the good stuff and I don't? And that little root of envy began to grow until the man was bitter at the other guy because he had the bed by the window. And he became very angry. One night, late at night, the man by the window began to cough and struggle breathing. The man heard it and he could have pushed the button to get the nurse, but he didn't. And the man died. They carried the man out. The nurse came in, was fixing the bed. And the man who was beside the wall said, could you move me over there close to the window? And the nurse said, sure, no problem. And they pulled him over to the window. And he propped himself up. He worked where he could get on his elbow because he couldn't hardly move. And he looked out the window and all he saw was a brick wall. And he said to the nurse, I don't understand. The man that just left that you carried out, he was telling me all kinds of sights he was seeing through the window. And she said, oh, I thought you knew that man was blind. He couldn't see. And he said, well, what made him tell me all those things? And she said, he just wanted to encourage you. He just wanted to lift you up and encourage you. Isn't it awful how envy can destroy something beautiful, something good? Now let me tell you something. Every one of us in this room is capable of jealousy and envy. And we need to guard against it and we need to watch it. And when we detect it, we need to repent of it quickly. If there's anybody that you cannot pray a blessing on, if there's anyone that you don't wish good on, let me tell you, there is a root of envy there. And you have to repent of it. And I tell you, the best way to deal, if you're envious of someone, the best way to deal with it is begin to pray for their blessing. Pray for God to bless them. It's hard to be jealous of somebody you're praying for. Now, if you're like me, there's been people in your life that you've felt envious towards. I could give you a list in my life. There's certain things and certain situations and certain problems and certain strivings that had come up in my life. But envy is such an awful, ugly, ugly sin that causes so much pain and hurt and can wreck a church and can wreck a life and can wreck a family. And it has no part in the life of a Christian. And if you sense these feelings coming up, and I tell you, I get them from time to time. They rise up in me. You need to recognize it quickly and take it to God and ask forgiveness and repent of it. You hear church splits and church problems and people that can't get along, and let me tell you what's the root of all of it. It's envy. Some of you, it may be a family member. It may be a brother. It may be a sister. It may be somebody at work. It may be a neighbor. No matter who it is, you need to deal with it. Let's bow for prayer.